Map design is the unsung hero of Fire Emblem. While the writing, the characters, and the supports are some of the most iconic features of the series, the maps are what keep the game so engaging for me. When I've tried Fire Emblem inspired games or ROM hacks, or even just some of the weaker entries in the Fire Emblem series, often they nail the art and offer interesting characters or mechanics, but the map design lets it all down. I'd like to make more videos in the future analyzing specific maps, so I thought I'd make a video to cover some of the basic principles of what I think makes a good map, so that I can reference that back later. There are three broad criteria I look at when evaluating a map: clarity and fairness, reward for risk, and narrative synergy. There's lots of other little things that contribute to what makes a map good or bad, but I think these are the most important three, and a lot of the other little stuff falls under one of these umbrellas. When I say clarity and fairness, what I mean is how well a player can understand a map and its challenges just by looking at it, and how fair new challenges feel when they're added in the middle of the map. So let's take a map like Chapter 9 of Erika's Route in Fire Emblem The Sacred Stones. Before making any moves, the player can see two relevant side objectives that inform which units you should deploy and how fast you need to play. First, we can see a village over the water from where your units spawn. Second, we can see a village on the left side of the map. And lastly, we can see several pirates, so we have a timeline on how long we have to get to those villages before the pirates destroy them. This is great clarity. We can see what side objectives exist, and we know how urgent they are. Since the player has this information, they have meaningful decisions to make. They can bring a flyer or a water walker to get the village to the south, and they can use high mobility units like Seth and Franz to rush to the village on the left. Alternatively, they can also decide to eschew one or both of the villages if they'd rather take the map at a safer, slower pace, or if they don't have a strong unit that they feel comfortable sending over the water with the pirates. The only challenge of this map that isn't immediately clear is Emilia, a recruitable character that appears on turn 5 and leaves on turn 12. While this may sound like a clarity problem, I think mid-chapter additions like this can be good when done right. In this case, Emilia spawns 7 turns before she leaves. Even if you took the first 5 turns at an agonizingly slow pace, there's plenty of time for you to adjust your strategy and get to Emilia in time. Mid-chapter challenges are only an issue if the player can put themselves in a position where the challenge can't be completed before they even know the challenge exists. For example, Emilia's recruitment would be bad if she left after 1 turn. It wouldn't feel fair since you might miss a recruitment simply because you had no idea she was going to spawn there. Instead, as the map is, you get 7 turns to adjust your strategy and get a unit there in time. So this map is clear because its challenges are well defined, and new challenges that appear midway through the chapter provide ample time for the player to react to them. Players will be making informed decisions throughout the entire map, so any failure to achieve a side objective feels fair. You know from the beginning that you need to move fast to get all of the things the map has to offer. Now let's look at a map with poor clarity. Chapter 28 of Fire Emblem 7, Battle Before Dawn, is an infamous map in the series. It does some things right that I'm going to talk about later, but one area where it fails is clarity. At first glance, Battle Before Dawn seems like a clear map. You can see all 3 green units that you want to protect, and you can see the treasure chest towards the bottom of the map. The issue is that without being able to see what's going on in the fog of war, this information just doesn't help you make good decisions. For example, at a glance, it looks like the green unit on the left should be lower priority than the green unit on the right. This is because the unit on the left, Jafar, is a high-level assassin that looks like he should be self-sufficient, whereas the mage on the right, Nino, is a low-level mage that looks like she might be in more danger. In fact, it's the other way around. Jafar is in far more danger than Nino. In fact, even moving at the fastest pace that you can, it's possible for Jafar to die before you reach him. This is because, while Jafar is much more competent in combat than Nino, he's also surrounded by powerful enemies that you can't see in the fog of war, whereas Nino is mostly near weaker enemies. The player has no way of knowing this, though, so it's likely that the first few times they play the map, they might be sending the bulk of their force down the right side of the map, when really they need to be sending their fast combat units down the left side to help out Jafar. You can move a little slower down the right side of the map, as the only quick threat to Nino is a caster with a 1% crit chance on her. So, in addition to a clarity issue, since you don't know how fast you need to move to reach these objectives, there's also a fairness issue with Jafar and Nino in that both of them can die for things totally out of your control. Jafar can die before you even get to him, and Nino can die to that 1% crit, and you have no chance of saving her. So there is a fairness issue where players will occasionally just fail this map through no decision making of their own. The other clarity issues on this map are the main objective and the chests at the bottom of the map. You know that you need to get down there and rescue Zephiel and get the chests if you want to, However, because of the fog of war, you can't see the enemies, and you have no idea how fast you need to get down there. So a lot of players will take this map too slow for the first time, and they'll fail the map a couple times until they realize they really need to hustle to get to the bottom. And when they get to the bottom, they'll run into the last annoying issue of this map for first-time players, which is the boss. Ursula boasts a bolting spell that can target your squishy units from far away in the fog of war. Once you're familiar with the map and her spawn location, it's no big deal. You can just send someone down to kill her. But the first time, when you don't know she's there, she's likely to snipe one of your squishy units, forcing you to restart the map. All of these issues make for a map where a new player may not be aware of how fast they need to be moving, and where deaths that feel unfair are common. What's worse is that players can't even always learn from a failed attempt. If Jafar happens to die early, players may think they need to be moving even faster and taking huge risks, when in reality, there's nothing they could have done to save him, they just needed better luck at the beginning of the map. This is why clarity is important. It's okay for players to lose and restart maps or miss side objectives, but they should always feel like they lost because of decisions that they made, rather than things that they couldn't predict. The next important factor for map quality is reward for risk. Without any incentive to take risks, the easiest way to beat most Fire Emblem maps would be to keep all of your units huddled into a little death ball, and bait enemy units in one at a time. This is sometimes called turtling, and it can be a pretty boring way to play the game, as it minimizes the interesting decisions the player has to make. Ideally, a map should encourage players to make interesting decisions. One way to do that is to provide incentives to play aggressively. This can be done in a multitude of different ways, but the most obvious is a turn counter. Some Fire Emblem maps will literally just tell you, you have this many turns to finish the map. Turn limits aren't something I advocate using a lot. They make sense in the story at times, but if you just throw a turn limit onto every map, it can feel very arbitrary. For most maps, there isn't a good story reason for there to be a time limit. Fortunately, there are other ways to reward players for being aggressive. One is to provide time-sensitive rewards, such as chests, villages, droppable items, and recruitable characters. All of these are resources players are going to want, but they often aren't game-breaking if you miss one. Maps with these kinds of time-sensitive objectives reward players that want to play fast while allowing players to take the map slowly if they're struggling and don't mind missing the rewards. A map that uses good optional objectives and a turn limit is Chapter 10 of Ephraim's Route in Sacred Stones. This map has a few side objectives. There's a village towards the top of the map that's in no real danger of being destroyed before you get to it, and a village in the southwest that's also unlikely to be destroyed since a team of green units spawn there. There's also a pair of recruitable characters. Dusel, the green unit on the left, and Cormag, the wyvern rider on the right. Additionally, there's a hidden objective to protect all 4 green units. If they all survive, they reward the player with a night crest at the end of the chapter. Some of these objectives are more time-sensitive than others. The villages are unlikely to be destroyed, and Dusel is unlikely to die quickly. Cormag and the green units present a bit more of a challenge. You'll want to move quickly to get someone in position to recruit Cormag, because he's strong enough to pick off one of your weaker units. You have 2 options for recruiting him. You can bring Tana with you, which can be challenging as she's vulnerable to ballistas on the water, or you can recruit Dusel and have him recruit Cormag. This option saves you a recruitment slot and prevents you from having to worry about the ballistas, but you need to move fast to make sure you've recruited Dusel and have him in position before Cormag starts moving and kills one of your units or himself. The green units also need to be protected. They can handle a couple rounds of combat, but if you leave them alone for too long, they'll bite off more than they can chew. To protect them, you need to get units to the bottom of the map quickly to rescue them. While none of these objectives are difficult on their own, a sense of urgency is added by the turn counter. You win the map after 10 turns, so turtling your way through the map isn't an option if you want to complete your side objectives. You have to move some units ahead quickly and take a few more risks to get the rewards. The only change I would make to this map is that I would have added a droppable item to the boss. As it stands, once you've completed your objectives, you can turtle for the last few turns to win the map. If the boss had an item to drop, that would add a little extra side objective to encourage you to push across the bridge and kill him, which in my opinion is the more fun way to play the map. One of the neat things about side objectives is designers can control how much incentive there is to go fast by which ones they used. For example, for most people, missing characters is not an option, so if you put a time-sensitive recruitable character on a map, most players will play as fast as they need to get it. On the flip side, some players may choose to ignore something like a weak droppable item, or a chest if they decide they don't need the reward. By choosing what side objectives to put on the map, designers can determine how much pressure they are putting on the player to move fast and take risks. Another interesting way of rewarding risk and fast play is reinforcements. These are a common feature in Thracia 776. Many of the maps in that game include armies of soldiers spawning behind you, which punishes you if you were turtling and forces you to progress through the map quickly or else deal with an onslaught of enemies. This approach works well in the beginning of Thracia, and it stops being used when it's no longer story appropriate. It is worth noting that you have to be a little careful when spawning a bunch of reinforcements, because the reinforcements have to be strong enough where fighting a lot of them isn't a viable option. If it's easy for the player to fight all the reinforcements, they just act as a form of grindable experience rather than a threat that keeps you moving along the map. Using any combination of these tools is a great way to make sure that your map has a quick pace and that players are rewarded for taking risks and moving along in a timely manner. Beyond the strategic elements of a map, one of the things that can really make it stand out is how well it's integrated within the story of the game, or what I call narrative synergy. One of my favorite chapters of Thracia 776 does this well, and it's the jailbreak in Chapter 4. Jailbreaks are reasonably common in Fire Emblem, but usually they just feel like normal maps. Thracia's Chapter 4 makes some interesting decisions that make it actually feel like a jailbreak. The map begins in unusual fashion with your lord and a pair of strangers trapped in a cell with no items, and your thief in another cell with a trio of brigands. A group of new allied units are outside the cells with lockpicks. You actually spend most of this map avoiding combat. Your units don't have weapons to begin with, so you have to spend time getting their gear back. You also want to save the green unit civilians, which makes the prison feel a little bit more real. By the time you've got everyone geared and civilians are freed, the reinforcements start coming. Again, you have to do your best to avoid combat, as you have limited healing items and the reinforcements spawn faster than you can handle them. Finally, this is the game's first escape map. The escape mechanic requires you to escort all of your units to the map's endpoint instead of just the lord. You can leave units behind, but doing so will have them be captured and inaccessible. This map is so narratively satisfying. It plays out exactly how you imagine a jailbreak would, carefully avoiding combat and killing guards when necessary, until the commotion brings out more guards and it's a mad dash for the exit where anyone who doesn't make it gets left behind. This feels so much more appropriate than a route or siege map, and it's part of why this map is so memorable. If this were a typical siege map, it wouldn't stand out at all, even if the map were otherwise well made. So anytime that you can incorporate elements of the story into a map that don't detract from the gameplay, it's good to do so. It doesn't always have to be by adding new crazy mechanics either. Things as simple as incorporating geographic elements from the story into maps can help connect the gameplay to the story in a meaningful way and prevent the dissonance that results from maps that are disconnected from the story. Basically, if the story says you're fighting near a big river, the big river should be a focal point of the map. Designers do need to be careful that narrative elements they add don't make the map play worse. Let's go back to Battle Before Dawn from Fire Emblem 7. The narrative synergy in that map is awesome. The Fog of War lines up with the assassination plot in the story, and the multiple side objectives that you can fail at any time creates a lot of tension and makes the chapter feel as chaotic as the story suggests it should. However, some of these elements also just make the map feel less fun to play. This doesn't mean you shouldn't shoot for good narrative synergy, you just need to make sure that your narrative elements aren't inhibiting the map from being fun. On the flip side, a lack of narrative synergy in maps can make the gameplay feel disconnected from the story. An example of narrative dissonance is basically all of Fire Emblem Conquest. The story makes a point to tell you that Corrin and her army aren't killing anyone, but it feels very disjointed from the gameplay. It's hard to believe your army aren't killing anyone when you're shooting arrows and flinging spells. If Conquest had made more use of non-combat objectives, or included capture as a baseline feature for all units, it would have made the gameplay feel a lot more connected to what's happening in the story. Narrative synergy on its own rarely makes a bad map much more fun, but when applied to a competently made map, it can make a fun but forgettable chapter into one of the most memorable ones in a Fire Emblem game. So those are the three foundational principles I think about when evaluating Fire Emblem maps. Clarity, fairness, and reward for risk are the most important things for making a Fire Emblem map feel fun, and these are the things that ensure players are making meaningful decisions and don't feel cheated. Combine this with good narrative synergy and you've got a memorable map on your hands. Obviously, there is more nuance to analyzing maps, and sometimes these features can be at odds with each other. For example, ambush reinforcements can often be story appropriate but can hurt the clarity of your map and punish fast play. There are also other factors that can lead a map to being more or less engaging, like difficulty, but I think that clarity, reward for risk, and narrative synergy are the big three. It's up to designers to find the best way to bear all three principles in mind, plus any additional ones they have for a specific map, and determine which ones to focus on and how to handle the interplay between the three. I hope this video explains some of the key factors I think are important in Fire Emblem map design, and will serve as a good foundational video for future references or streams on specific maps. If you have any different takes on these principles, or think there are other ones I missed out on, please let me know in the comments, or if you enjoyed the video and want to see more like it, consider hitting the like or subscribe button.